gone through some of those readings that were provided. So what we'll do is discuss the core points that emerge from those readings, and also look into some of the additional issues that we might have to encounter in the way decisions have been given by various Indian courts on the issue of fair dealing. I'm sure you also had an introductory class on fair dealing, because you have some readings based on US law, right? In some cases, Campbell case, and then others. So basically, then you have a fair bit of idea of what fair dealing or fair use is. So can anybody just we'll have this discussion, this class in a discussion format, so that we can engage with each other, and then have time for questions also. So yeah, any idea fair use, fair dealing, what does it all mean? Just plain words. I don't want any legal definition, because there is no legal definition that can help you in achieving a sort of perfect case scenario. So any understanding of fair use?
An exception to copyright infringement.
Exception to copyright infringement. That's how the copyright law defines it, as an exception to copyright infringement. That's one of the most dominant paradigms of understanding what fair use actually is, or fair dealing actually is. Any other view on this issue?
Yeah, so in one of the readings they mentioned that they do understand, there could be more than two, but there could be mainly two understandings of fair use. One is exception to copyright, which would be understanding copyright, property rights, and hence exception to copyright. The other understanding would be for this progress of science and literature, so then fair use would become justified use of someone else's work.
More in the nature of freedoms, and that's the nature of right rather than as an exception. Fair enough. So broadly, you understand that this is a highly contested issue of what fair use is, because it pertains to how you pose limitations on the scope of copyright holders' power to extract royalties, or to extract other terms and conditions for his work, right? So basically, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you a broad outline of what we'll discuss, and then deal in detail. So first, why fair use and fair dealing? I'll give you a bit of perspective from a conceptual and theoretical background as to the relationship between property and liability. Have you heard of this term called liability? Liability. Property you have heard, because you are reading property, and copyright is one form of property. Liability, haven't you heard of liability? You have? What is liability? In the context of product liability, there is the word liability. So you understand that there is product liability, but in its relationship with economic power, do you have any basic understanding? Anyway, doesn't matter. So we'll look at fair use from this property liability perspective and see what fair use actually is. Then we'll look into some of the basic underlying policy dimensions of copyright law and policy, primarily to revisit some of those broad underpinnings, because these are again contested, whether this is one way to look at copyright or whether there are several ways of looking at copyright. Okay. Then rational basis for fair use, or what is zero liability, and I'll introduce you to what is zero liability also in a bit of time. Then how is fair dealing looked in from an Indian perspective? Is there a difference between fair use and fair dealing? And is the Indian code on fair dealing, which you have section 52, is that an exhaustive code, a complete code? If you look into Anand Padmanabhan's commentary, has a fair bit of explanation on whether it's a complete code or whether it's whether it's prone to certain interpretations based on certain principles involved in fair use. So fair dealing, fair use, exhaustive, non-exhaustive. Finally, fair use and its relationship with remedies. Because you evaluate fair use in relationship to infringement most of the times, and that's where your job ends. right? Because but as lawyers, as practicing lawyers, you would rather be interested in understanding fair use not just from a defense, a limitation, an exception to the right perspective, but look into fair use or fair dealing and its relationship with remedies, right? And what are the remedies in copyright law? Injunction, accounts for profit, damages, right? So this is and you have criminal sanctions also, right? Copyright law is another instrument where, is a unique instrument where you have criminal sanctions. And there are historical reasons for why copyright has criminal sanctions, which patent law does not have, for example. Okay? So then we'll discuss fair dealing in India. We'll look into some of the cases, and we'll do this through cases. We'll look into musical works, what qualifies for review, personal use, whether if you take something which has a specific time period, say if it's a movie of 1 hour and you take 7 minutes, 10 minutes, does it qualify for some kind of fair use? Is there a de minimis exception apart from fair use? And what is de minimis basically? De minimis is law doesn't care for the trivial. Yeah. So whether there is such an exception and whether there is a standalone exception in copyright law in theory and practice, whether de minimis can be an exception independent of fair use or whether it has some nexus with fair use. Then also we'll try and look into what happens when copyright is licensed to a party and then the licensee uses it, and further a second person, that is a third party in relationship with the copyright owner, uses that kind of work. So some kind of a secondary infringement of a work, and how would that be viewed from the prism of fair use? We'll look into certain cases, and we'll look into the scope of criticism. What do you mean by criticism in relation to fair use? Because criticism can be in relation to the work as such. It means criticism of the work, and criticism of something else based on the work. So use certain things, okay, but you don't criticize the work as such, okay, but you criticize some other aspects, or you use it for some other reasons other than criticism. And can criticism be extended to those forms? So and then finally some of the issues in relation to cinematographic, film and sound recordings, because increasingly as students, teachers and those who are interested in a bit of remixes, mashups and those form of amateur art and culture, how does copyright law impact such things, such remixing? Because today a lot of stuff is available online, so you pull things, you mash it up, right? Rip, burn and upload. So what do you do actually when you do it? Are you fair dealing or are you outside the scope of fair dealing? And how do you understand it? Because most of the content that you use for such purposes is copyrighted, A, and secondly, most of the content that you use today is much more than just print content. You're using cinematograph films and music largely. You make these videos and copyright law has this understanding of criticism and some other kinds of fair dealing from a total print perspective. Although it has to be media neutral, but then that's how copyright law has historically evolved. So we'll try and see how that kind of history is going to impact ways and means in which we create culture and we produce culture today. Okay. And finally, a very interesting view photocopying case which is ongoing and which is a very contentious battle between publishers and students. So, on behalf of the students, others, okay. So, but students have also made a petition, so we'll try and understand the implications of what's going on, what's happening in this case. So, property versus liability. Why property? What does property do? What does property basically do? Can you tell me what are the two important ingredients in property that defines fundamentally what property is? Although there may be other ingredients, other essential characteristics, but most defined, most essential.
Ownership.
to use it to
Ownership and control, right? Right to exclude. So basically, rights, a bundle of rights, and then what? Is that it? Is that the essential core of property? Remedies, most important. You have a right and you don't define remedies, means nothing, right? So rights and remedies are the core of what property law is, and what property law does. In defining the rights, although it says it's a bundle, the most fundamental feature or the primary feature of this property right is the right to exclude, right? And then you have other type of secondary bundle of rights which primarily relate to how you convey the property or how you transact the property, how you alienate the property, right? So one is the exclusion thesis, and second one, the second prong is the conveyance or the transfer thesis. So you have this in your property system which allows you to hold control or ownership. Why is it necessary? You have all done this fundamentals, but I am trying to relocate or remap this in the context of fair use, and that's why it becomes important to get back into a bit of why property, because there can be so many other forms of cultural productions. Do you do your project assignments because there's going to be copyright law that is going to save you from that is going to derive your royalties? Why do you write fundamentally?
But so before that, your definition of property, it's a private property centric, right? Because we're not talking about commons, but commons could be called, like say, community property too, but then there would be no right to exclude.
No right to exclude for those within the community. For those outside the community, there is always a right to exclude. For example, geographical indications, right? It's a collective ownership, right? But it's with reference to those members in the group. So it depends on how you define commons. Commons in relation to the beneficiaries, who the beneficiaries are. You're right. So if it's a common for the whole world, like the air which we breathe, then it's commons. Then there is no exclusion because everybody has as much as you have. Right? Basically private property. And you are right. Because we are talking about copyright and it being used as a tool for making money, commercial exploitation by a private party. It's not that state cannot have copyright. State does have copyright on its work, but it can also waive copyright for several reasons. So now, why property? Because you have several reasons why you produce. Motivation. Right? You are motivated, fundamentally motivated to create the work. Second, subsidies. That someone, third party, is going to give you money to produce the work. For example, all the research papers that are written by the scientific institutions and universities come out of what? Is it a prominent copyright and royalty driven understanding of why the work gets created, or is it because you already have subsidies, you get your pay and you create in the process, and copyright is subsidy? So what are the fundamental motivations? Because subsidy is one of the biggest ways in which there can be cultural production, at least scientific production. And I'm talking about scientific production in relation to the research papers that come out, where knowledge is dispersed, widely used, and that's how sharing in the scientific community goes on. One of the major ways in which scientists work is through reading research papers, right? So if you look into the structure of science, fundamental science is university driven, and at a later stage a level of applied sciences is also carried out by certain research institutions. For example, in India you have CSIR, right? And then at the level of taking it from the lab scale to the market, there are private vendors. So basically there is a subsidy. Why not prices? the teacher tells you, your post supervisor tells you that you are going to get a chocolate for a write-up, one-page write-up. Are you driven by copyright? What are you driven by? You are driven by that price. Now if you have price, if you have subsidies, if you have other different motivations, then why property? So property is basically because property allows you, okay, to set its value based on the functioning of the market. Okay. In these cases, subsidies, prices, internal motivations, especially subsidies and prices, because there are monetary tools, I wouldn't know ex ante as to what is going to be a sufficient incentive for you to produce that work. Maybe a chocolate is sufficient, maybe not. Yeah. So if the government is giving the subsidy, the government wouldn't know what should be the right amount of subsidy that would lead to optimal incentive for the particular person to create the work. What does the market do?
Yeah. Prices.
It discovers the right price, right? And that's why property like instrument is a good weapon to optimize the relative efficiencies of the working of the free market system and its relation and how resources get allocated. So, for example, if I have to write a book and the university funds me, $10,000 or 10,000 or 10 lakh rupees, okay, I might just write trash. It will get published, but nobody is going to read it. But if the university doesn't provide me anything, or if it just provides basic facilities like it does, and then what do? I have a copyright, I price it, and because the book is trash, it doesn't sell, or if the book is too good, the market responds. So price is the factor which allows a property-like instrument to be an efficient instrument. But the question is property always efficient? When is it not? And that's where fair use comes. If property was so efficient all the time, why would you have limitations to a property right? Why would you have? Ideally. So it means property is also not a perfect instrument. Why is it not a perfect instrument? Yeah, it's there. Dead weight loss in the society. And what do you mean by dead weight loss in the society? Yeah.
Exclusionary and
monopolistic, exclusionary.
No intrinsic value per se.
Like?
I'm just guessing. For example, currency note.
Yeah.
The currency has value, but the paper doesn't. Let's say if I have
no intrinsic value.
Yes, and if I have a lot of fields, and if I don't cultivate them, then it has no or have any kind of capital formation on that, it has no value.
It means the dead weight society, loss on the society is not just in terms of the monopoly and the impact it has on people who want to access that particular work. In this case, I'm using the term work because it's copyright. But it's also in terms of the copyright owner's own ability to exploit the work in its fullest peak. For example, if it's needed to create further works, future works, and if the copyright holder says, I am not going to license, it's his decision because the right to exclude also includes the power to refuse a license. Right? And if he refuses the license, well, he might have an incentive to create. But are there equal opportunities for people to create? Right? And then what happens? He creates, he may not create. But the society there, and the same argument can also apply to the society at large, they may create, they may not create. But what is fundamental is whether they have that access or the opportunity to create. Get this dynamics? So, in a sense, if the property is defined in a very hardcore manner, what would happen, what would end up is a strong instrument in the hands of the copyright owner who will not just, charge monopoly rents, he might also refuse licenses, and then overall creativity might suffer. So there are a lot of transformative uses that copyright law wants to encourage, right? Through copyright law, that by virtue of you having an incentive, by virtue of copyright law, and also by allowing that kind of work that is already created, okay, to be relied on by other people and create more works. So then what is liability? Liability is the best form of limitation on property. So what do you mean by liability? So this term got into currency in a paper written by Calabresi and Menward in the Harvard Law Review in 1970s, and he said that basically you have a property system in which the price is determined by virtue of the market, right? The market responds to a particular price. Basically the market sets the price, and why the market sets the price? If I were to put out my book at 1 lakh rupees, probably nobody is going to buy it, or maybe 10 people are going to buy it because they are my relatives, right? But if I'm a sensible seller, what am I going to do? I'm going to just price it so optimally that I enhance my potential to earn royalties and trade it off with, okay, the size of the market. It's not that I want to reach to the last person on earth, right? Because the last person on earth might not even have 10 bucks to pay for it, right? So I'm not going to price it so low, and I'm not going to price it so high. So I'm going to price it so optimally as much as I can recover from the market with a certain volume. So the volume need not be 100% always. Okay, and that's why there are problems. What are the problems? The people who want to have access do not have enough, although they have a willingness to buy, it is not backed by capacity to buy, right? So basically that's where the problem is. Yeah.
In this situation, it's not the market that has determined the price, right? It's your own evaluation of the market, rather than you just offering the price and the free market determining the price of your work. You make an evaluation and before you put it out, and you put a certain price tag on the work. It's not like you're rethinking the price once it's out of the market.
Yeah, you're right. But fundamentally, businesses think in binary. They have what is called as a known market, and there is something called as a missing market. And what do you mean by a missing market? A missing market is one, okay, that the copyright owner thinks that he will never be able to cater to. Why? Because he can't bring it down to that level. Because the moment he brings down the price to that level, what is going to happen? Basically, he is going to subsidize those who don't just have the willingness to pay, but also have the capacity to pay higher. Because a tiered price, labeling is not possible in the market. Although it can be made possible by branding it differently, but not always. In a single brand, you can't price, because people then will go for the cheapest one if they know that the brand is cheap.
I don't think there is differential pricing as per country.
Yeah, there is differential pricing.
And also
Paperback versus hardbound, depending on when it comes, there is a difference. But then there are also restrictions imposed by copyright law, and some countries have those restrictions even now, whether you can import them into other countries, or also whether you can export them into other countries. What is largely governed by the principles of exhaustion. Although export is not governed by principles of exhaustion, import is. Okay, but some countries like India have also defined that you can't export to countries, because that would violate the right of the copyright holder here. Although you are not producing for this market, you are producing for some other market, right? So there are issues with reference to how you want to define exhaustion and If you want to do more on exhaustion, we can have a separate class, because exhaustion is a very complicated issue, and then there is a copyright amendment which failed, and then it didn't make out. And then finally now there is a report being released by Professor Chadha, who is from NICER, National Applied Economic Research Committee. So there are issues around parallel importation, and some countries allowing it, some countries not allowing it. Yeah?
We discussed parts of this in the previous.
Yeah. So naturally you know that there can be price discrimination, but in a single market, let's consider India as a single market. It's difficult to price differentially based on the end last consumer you want to serve. So what will businesses do? Businesses will say that these are the people who you can never cater to. Okay? And that's why they are the missing markets for you. They are as good as no markets for them. So for your question, whether you want to consider the market as a whole, so businesses would consider it otherwise. Okay? That's a business perspective. So what is liability? What does liability do? So if property allows you to put a product in the market and market to determine what the price is, in liability, market is not going to determine, some third form party will intervene, like the court or like the copyright board. Okay, they are going to determine what should be the actual royalty. And how do they calculate it? There are various methods of evaluating or valuating what your property is. And it's very difficult to do so. And why would it be difficult to do so? How do you evaluate real property? Usually. So if I want to evaluate this piece of land, what would I usually do? How would I evaluate it?
You look at the purpose and then you look at market. So
Zoning. Basically, I will look into how property is sold, at what prices property is sold, in the surroundings. But in case of intellectual property, more in case of copyright, every work is unique. Oh, that's why you give a property right, don't you? Why would you give a property right on something that is already there?
But in that sense, even like every piece of land is sort of unique. But for instance, if you have science fiction books, you will know that you have similar books out there in the market
Yeah.
at a particular price.
So would you want to compare Amartya Sen's book with my book? Who would you compare Amartya Sen's?
Okay, so you could compare a book by Kant with a book by Rawls because then the market would be similar.
Think so?
No, but then the point is that, I don't know, like when you're comparing property, you compare two kinds of property which, while the quality might be different, like what you're able to read from it might be different, but they're essentially same in terms of purpose. Like if one plot in Dwarka is equal to another plot in Dwarka, but then I can't pull the same argument and say that my book on philosophy is the same as Rawls' book on philosophy. So there's that difference.
There is, and why is it so? Because originality is one of the important purposes of why copyright law exists. It's a fundamental, pre-qualification for a work getting qualified for copyright. So, since every work is unique in some sense, it's difficult also for third-party interveners to actually value the property in a very efficient way. Efficient in the sense of economic efficiency. That it is optimally priced. Because when market responds, people consider that is optimum. Why that is optimum? Although there is this question of missing markets. But whatever the market segment is, if that responds, then that is optimum because there is a willing buyer with a capacity and there is a willing seller, they need decide. Here the third party intervenes like a court, like a copyright board and sets a royalty. That royalty, we do not know whether it's perfect or not. How is it possible to evaluate a new song that has come, okay, very perfect, but today that is done, and that's the way copyright system has changed. So it's not property altogether, it's also liability. How do you think music is played on your radio? New music? Because if content creators, music composers and film walas, if they stuck to their copyright royalty rates, and if broadcasting organizations like the radio and television broadcast want it at a very lower rate. Why? Because they have an interest in, displaying it at a lower cost. How would these two people meet? So sometimes they meet by virtue of contracts, okay, and sometimes they don't meet, and that's where liability becomes important, because then the copyright board is going to set the royalty for it, based on the log hours, based on what time it is played, right? So several factors might be considered in determining that kind of royalty. So you have property, you have liability, and why do you have liability? Because property is not always efficient. But when is liability efficient? When is liability efficient? Because liability, in some sense, means that you will have to compensate the copyright owner. But in case of fair dealing, you don't compensate the copyright owner. And that's very interesting. Why don't you compensate the copyright owner? Why are they permitted uses? Plain and simple. Just permitted uses. You don't need a permission, right? Nor do you pay him the money. Him includes flow. Just to be gender neutral. So, what is this whole funda of zero liability? Because you have zero liability and you have compensatory liability. And in compensatory liability, the third party intervener like the court or the copyright board is going to award damages or award you some compensation. For example, when copyright is infringed, okay, courts have to arrive at damages. Courts have to compensate the copyright owner. So in some form, whenever parties don't meet, that is a prospective licensee and the copyright holder do not meet, and they go to court, there is some form of liability rule in place. Okay. Now those kind of liability and what compensation, how compensation has to be done. Copyright law has different sections for statutory, licensing, music, for broadcasting purposes and albums for broadcasting purposes. In some cases where there is no access to a copyrighted work, then you might want to give a compulsory license. A lot of facets of how a liability rule can be structured. But one of the most predominant way of structuring a liability rule is a zero liability rule, where you don't pay any dime to the copyright holder and you can use it. So that's the predominant form. So now you understand property and liability still the problems are. Now why zero liability in the first place? Why do you think that those uses that you have in fair dealing should be actually free? Why? We'll understand that in a bit because we have rational basis for having fair use. But before that, what's the underlying policy dimension of copyright? And all this probably you have read it somewhere, done it all through your copyright course. Okay. So at the risk of being repetitive, but still you look into these 4-5 features, 6 in fact. It's said that copyright is a engine of free speech, right? At the same time, if property is, as copyright law is interpreted in such a way that there is no free speech for others, then there can be a contestation. There is a contestation. So I am raising these points because these are highly contested. So when is copyright an engine of free speech? Vis-a-vis how can copyright actually deter people from having their right to free speech? Public domain. What is one of the most important reasons why you have copyright law? Seems obvious, it's a public domain, but why? People would generally think in terms of individual creators' efforts that he must have an incentive. That's the incentive for the creator. But is that the public policy objective of copyright law? What should be the public policy objective? Why should we as citizens or society be bothered about some individual's creation? So we want a vibrant public domain of ideas. The society has to flourish. Then we need the public domain. So that's the underlying public policy objective. The public policy objective of incentive to creator is one of the other ones. The prominent ones is public domain. Ease of access. Copyright law is built as an instrument which is not a perfect instrument, in the sense it's a leaky right. And why is it a leaky right? Because it can't be efficient all the time. Law has created exceptions for reducing what are called as transaction costs. For example, it would be difficult for me to run to the copyright owner to ask him if I have to quote one passage from his book. Does it make sense for me to go there and ask him all the time? Copyright owner, please, I need to quote this today. Now, I get a license. Copyright owner, please, I need to quote this now. Second license. So there are higher transaction costs. So you want to reduce those transaction costs, so you want to have ease of access. Right? Affordability. So one of the reasons why, the way copyright law is structured around fair use is also to make it affordable. This is again contested. And why is it, and when we look into the due for copying case, this will be an important factor. Whether affordability can be one of the factors in determining what should be the scope of fair use. Okay. And why is it contested? Because if affordability is linked to paying nothing, okay, a zero liability rule, then why do you have a compensatory liability rule like a compulsory license? Because when is a compulsory license issued basically? A compulsory license is issued when the people do not have access to work, or when there is another some kind of a public policy, okay, that the work is not coming to the public, like Doniger's work, Penguin who doesn't want to publish. So what would people do? People would say that you have to get a compulsory license and publish your book. So who is going to publish it? Some third party publisher can publish your book. Right? So compulsory license. So if you have compulsory license for affordability, blah blah blah, then why do you have this as one of the reasons for fair use? Incentive for the creator. Fair use is again not a very open-ended thing. You have to actually have some nexus of preserving the balance of incentives for the creator. Because if fair use is interpreted in a way that completely stifles and suffocates the inventor, then it's no fair use at all, because it's not an exception. Right? And then authorial integrity. So when you deal with fair use, okay, you'll also encounter questions of how do you deal with the kind of work, and if certain defenses in relation to moral rights are raised. Well, there is fair use, no problem. Enjoy your fair use, but don't you ever dare criticize or create a parody out of it in such a way that it can violate my right to integrity. Because right to integrity is one of the features of moral rights, if you are done moral rights on it, right? So there are several dimensions of how you want to understand this linkages between fair use and several aspects of policy underlying the copyright system. So, a rational basis for fair use, zero liability. The first question is whether there should be an existing market for license. And what do I mean by a market for license? That it is possible to license a particular type of use, and that's why you don't need fair use. Because I am able to license it to you, why don't you take a license? Simple. In a situation where, for example, quotations, 111, there is a huge transaction cost to go and get the license. So that's one of the reasons why you want to have a fair use system, because the transaction costs are so high that it will not be possible for you to actually go and get a license and make effective use out of it. I mean, if you want to write a project, okay, or a seminar paper, and you go to 10 different copyright holders and say that whether I can put it in my project, it doesn't sound nice, because there are going to be so many times the transaction cost vis-a-vis the benefits you are going to derive from that project. So it doesn't work. So is that the only reason why you should have fair use? Or if it's possible that you have a market for license. So tomorrow, what do? You project writers, okay, You are not going to quote me and my book, okay, unless you take an online license from me. You don't need to run to my office in Delhi. What do you need to do? Switch on your computer, have an internet connection, log into my website, pay through your credit card, and there you go. You get to quote whatever you want. So depending on the size of the quotation, the bill will increase or decrease. So can't I have that kind of a situation where I can actually do what? License any kind of use to you. Can't I? In a situation where internet is ubiquitous and can be accessed by everyone, same time, zero marginal cost, what do? I can have a form of licensing model. Why not?
Why should there be license